energy transition that calls us today. We are about to conclude this course. We've been having the very enriching and productive sessions for all those who have joined us. Today, we have a session that is tied to everything that we've been working on in the previous days. This session is focused on the management and financing of projects. Therefore, today we have two very interesting speakers who are going to be introduced shortly. We hope that these sessions that we've been unfolding to foster the conversation about the role of the youth and how to empower the youth in this energy ecosystem that involves us, everyone, in this mission for the participation of the youth. To introduce our first speaker, it is a pleasure to introduce Dr. Liliana Campos Arrega, Chief of the project GIZ in Mexico, where she supervises the portfolio of sustainable building. And she's in the program of rehab for energy efficiency for social housing in Mexico, and currently of the energy efficiency project in buildings in Mexico. She was responsible for the preparation and the new flagship project for energy just transition in Mexico with over 20 years of experience. She's joining us today, Liliana, with this journey in international cooperation that I'm sure is going to be very valuable for those attending this session. So welcome, and the floor is all yours to start this presentation. Thank you so much, Valentina, and everyone for joining us today. I'm going to share now my screen. I just tested it, so I think that it's going to look good. Yes, yes, it's not full screen yet. I'm sure it's uploading because I can't see anything. Yes. We see the presenters screen. Could you please switch perhaps to full screen? To the normal, regular. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Okay, then. Well, I would like to talk about an international cooperation project that I didn't have to prepare it, but I implemented and closed it in Mexico. This is a project funded by the Ministry of Economic Cooperation of Germany, GIC. This is the one that financing it, and we have a bilateral agreement with Mexico to do these type of projects. Basically, the general data, this is a bilateral project. There are different projects in international cooperation. There are bilateral projects where we cooperate between Germany and Mexico, for instance. In this case, is the technical German cooperation, but we have also global projects implemented in different countries at the same time, and regular or regional projects. This is a bilateral project. The donor is the Ministry of Cooperation of Economic and Development, GIC, and this was worth 6 million euros for 49 months. We closed it last a few months ago, and we had conditions to improve the energy efficiency in the housing for social interest. We had 3 lines of business, or 3 action lines known as outputs as well. The first output was financing. We had to reach 5,000 request goal to improve the financing in the plan of renewable energy and energy efficiency. We have other sub-indicators where we had 6 proposals and 10 events in this output or action line for financing. Our second output was about technological transparency, and there we had to reach for a federal program in Mexico to promote at least 20% of reduction in the energy consumption of the existing housings. We had also to pull off a publication and 10 activities in regard to this technological transfer activity. I'm going to tell you what we did in every output, just so that you have an idea on how each one of these activities comply with all these goals and the impact for the strengthening of the framework conditions. The third output was training. In the capacity building, we had to train 100 specialists and 250 evaluators, specialists, evaluating specialists of the existing housing. We worked with different partnerships. Our counterpart was the Secretariat or the Ministry of the Urban, Territorial, and agrarian development that has as a mandate the part of housing in Mexico. Also Development Bank, the BIDB, and other NGOs and grant agreements that you're going to see shortly. To implement this project, we performed a different cross-cutting activity. One of the most important measures that we use is the one grant agreements. These are funds that we provide different organizations to execute some of the tasks on our behalf. One of these was that the pilot project that used a trust fund that depending on the commission, that depends on the commission of the electrical company of the state, actually, where we had a grant agreement. We provide grant agreement for 100,000 euros in 30 houses in the northern part of the country. We also had a pilot project of self-production of housing. We could distinguish these into types of the commercial type of housing, which is available in the market. You go outside on the street, you see this house that you like, and you buy it. And the way to produce the self-production housing is when the end user decides the land where they are going to build, the design, the time, the type of financing, type of materials, etc. So it is this type of production of housing. Self-production is done in the different quintile of income, and this pilot project was based or focused on the low income. For that, we provided a grant of 300,000 euros in order to improve the energy system in 24 housing in different states. We also performed a monitoring project in existing housing where we had a grant agreement to an NGO, Hub City, Yucatan, to carry out the simple and detailed monitoring of different houses that have been built. Within the actions that we took for the self-production model, we helped the government of Mexico, the SEDATO, and to develop their national strategy of self-production based on these 5 pillars: soil, urban development, financing, technical assistance, and communication. You have the QR code if you want to download that. This was part of the government of Mexico. So that you have an idea, over 66% of the houses are built with the self-production in Mexico. There was a type of production that was not well assisted, especially in terms of energy efficiency, comfort, and renewable energies. Another project that I showed you is the monitoring project, and we did this with the before and after thermal simulations and evaluations, where we assessed the design, typology, materials, and the technologies that were going to be applied. Those houses were built afterwards. And what we did is an exposed evaluation or assessment where we pulled out the data of the actual performance of water, mitigation of CO2, and energy. And we used different methodologies for documentation, and we saw that where were the opportunities with this program that was implemented through the federal government to improve this program of financing. We performed a simple monitoring where we went to the houses, we met the users. We documented the conditions of the environment and the consumptions of water, energy, and gas because of the residues that they got, as well as the inner comfort of the houses, with just open-ended questions. Are you hot? Are you cold? Etc., etc. And then we did a detailed monitoring where we implemented an instrumentation with data loggers, sensors to measure, for instance, a specific electrical consumption like air conditioner, water rate, temperature outside and inside the houses. And that's how we did these monitoring that lasted 10 months. This simple detail monitoring, we did it 250, 240 for the simple monitoring, 25 for detailed monitoring. There were houses that had no energy efficiency, and other houses that were built under the Go Casa program to find out whether this made sense of what was happening in reality. Every single project of DKTI housing was executed throughout the pandemic times. So it was very challenging to reach those houses at the time. So we had a hybrid methodology, which was the combination of we had on-site and remote events as well. And also the social and technical part were going hand in hand. The social aspect, well, we did a socialization of the project with the community before entering with any technical activities. We described them what was going to be the process of monitoring, whether they wanted to be engaged so that their houses were going to be monitored, if they would allow to place the sensors inside the houses. And those houses that were selected, they underwent a training a process to the end users. Also, the social part that we tackle the technological empowerment. Every single household who participated, we provided them a tablet with a specific software where they had this monitoring control panel that they uploaded pictures, they took the temperatures, also the receipts where they paid. Also, we accessed a dedicated internet just for monitoring, not for Netflix or anything, just for monitoring purposes. So we made sure that we had no holes in the research that we were collecting. The technical aspect, we had visits on site, we verified the many things in the houses, of thermal bridges, and we verified the testing of humidity, thermal control, etc. There you can see the advisors who were on site explaining all the technologies, checking the thermal sources, thermal bridges. Here you can see the pictures, the infrared pictures, also the dedicated internet, the meteorological devices that we left outside and inside the houses, and also the high consumption equipment, also the low test to find out how we were doing, and also the infiltration issues, whether they had venting control, etc. This monitoring, of course, all these data collated, we did it remotely through platforms where we were able to visualize and analyze this information. And then we pulled out some recommendations for the program that was being implemented there. So what we saw is that the users was fundamental. That is how to use this housing by the user. That was essential. And also the usage and habits. The original projects were built with a backyard in the middle to have some venting and ventilation. So these patios or these backyards were together with another house. In the simulation, it was considered some benefit with the cross ventilation in their backyards. However, in the real life, the users preferred to build and cover that patio to have more privacy instead of sharing with the neighbor, and that's where we didn't have the benefit of the cross venting. But also we went to the development bank to update the project for financing purposes. I'm going to show you another pilot project that we carried out, but these are commercial housing, a commercial housing project. You should see the video and listen to it. Can you see it? No. If I press click, it goes to the next slide instead of playing the video. If I press enter, it also goes to the next slide. How can I press play? Do you have perhaps the link of YouTube or the file? Perhaps we can project that. Okay, there you go. In Baja California and Hermosillo, cities that are very hot in the summer and very dry throughout the year. Both cities the houses are the same as Mexico with no energy efficiency standard without leveraging the renewable energies. Well, we can have up to over 50 degrees. Very hot, to have air conditioning most part of the time. As a solution, we have developed a supporting programs that allow the population to access energy efficiency consumption. The ASI systemic comprehensive program have provided financing for energy efficiency, such as air conditioning equipment, electrical appliances, and solar panels. But together with GIZ in Mexico, and with the technical advice of Copa Infra, executed a pilot project. Their goal was to show the technical and financial viability to rehab 30 houses through the global performance of housing. We installed what was a reflective film, the solar panels, and also the isolation and roofs. The technical assistance was the analysis of energy consumption, the physical condition of houses, and the capacity for the depth of the users. Also, we worked on the walls. So we placed also closed windows, and there was a solar plant that is going to help us to produce energy in the consumption for houses. There has been a reduction in the cost of electricity, more than 50%, and the energy efficiency higher levels also place the thermal isolation across the house of efficient windows and the venting, special venting equipment. They decrease the cost through the induction stoves and other appliances. According to the energy efficiency, these houses emitted from 2.5 to 6.8 tons of CO2 per year, equivalent to 213 and to up to 573 trees annually. Well, people are interested in improving their quality of life by saving energy. Well, the workers of Ipaterm, as well as distributors, are really aware and very clear about this awareness that the energy savings should be more comprehensive. It shouldn't be done just per se, but considering the comprehensive situation of the houses and the needs themselves of the users. These projects shows that the technical and financial viability to design the financing and affordable financing to contribute to development of country and also to improve the quality of life of people. Well, that's the pilot project that we carried out. In this issue of the project preparation, it's sometimes necessary to make pilot projects to prove the technical and financial viability when you want to go to a national scale. This pilot project was done to 30 houses. It was the trust fund of CCP pattern that we had over 9,000 houses financed with this scheme. that we tested in this pilot project. Here we have a few data so that you have an idea. We keep improving this step by step, or step one is very simple, just to change the electrical appliances. And step two, they have thermal isolation, very closed windows, also mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And this is, of course, in Mexican pesos, but you can see how much is the credit and what has to be asked and the different monthly payments for those pilot projects. Some of the blueprints, we see the ventilation, the air filtering. These are very important issues to take into account. There were many products that were not available in the market, such as the tapes to control humidity, and some of the tests that we did. For instance, this concept of optimization with thermal isolation, the thermal bridges, ventilation projects that we put in step three, we were able to save over 80% of energy consumption in these houses. More pictures of the thermal bridges before and after, placing everything at all the values of closeness of 2.71. We reduced to 0.91, which is a very closed enclosed houses with more can sustain comfort for a longer time. This is the Interfeed standard, and I think that's all. It would be great to discuss with you. If you have any doubts or projects about these type of projects, about energy efficiency and in renewable energies in the buildings in general, let's share. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liliana. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, I can hear you. Great. So we have a question on the chat to start this discussion. What criteria did you use for the selection of the houses that were part of the pilot project? How much time did you estimate for all three stages or phases? This is by Juliana Mingetti. Sorry, I lost that last part, but in regard to the criteria, it depends on what pilot project, because we have like 4 pilot projects. The monitoring project, the selection of the houses where that they had no modification. These were like the basic houses with no modification. It was the original prototype. And also the Eco Casa housing with no modifications, like another room or any other construction additions, and that had the energy efficiency measures financed by the Eco Casa program. The project that we showed in the pilot project with CIFI pattern, it was basically the requirements. The structural and technical requirements that they had no structural issues, and they didn't have any modifications in regard to that everything should have an energy efficiency measure. And also an important thing for selection of households is that their credit and form and the capacity of payment could adjust to the AP pattern project. The design of the project was how much do the households earn, how much they can get indebted, how much they can use this money for energy efficiency. Many times at the pilot projects, they go all the way around. They want to have this great ambition of reduction of CO2, but then they say, okay, who's going to pay that? What's the credit that is going to, who's going to take it? So the idea was here to keep adjusting to have the profile of the socioeconomic profile of the households and to match it with the energy efficiency model to find the savings. Thank you. Juliana also made a comment. Thank you so much for that excellent answer. She thinks it's very interesting to include a distribution criteria or their capacity of payment when they get indebted. Okay, Daniel, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead. Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to ask a question to Liliana. In fact, so far is being one of the presentations that have called my attention for several reasons, because this is something that I worked recently in the Santa Cruz department, and I was going to make an energy efficiency study for the installations of our governor's um, office in a public institution, because according to the studies and that thesis that was written back then, the Environmental Educational Center, where that is part of the Ministry of Environment, it was 22,000 Bolivians. It was around 3,000 3,000 US dollars. It ended in $7,000. So I proposed the idea that all institutions should not only promote the situation of energy efficiency within the society or the houses of people, but also to make some introspection on how our institutions and our authorities are consuming our energy, because the money that is paid without utility comes from the population itself. So, and also in parallel with the national government of Bolivia, they created a state agency of housing, and they started to build several houses in different areas of the country where the government was financing 100% of the house, as long as they would live for over 1 or 2 years, and then the house would be under the people's name. So it would be great to do something like you did, and these were built until a couple of months ago, because we are starting elections here in Bolivia, and it would have been great to implement this type of project, because it's not only about how much we can produce, but how much we can also save instead of spending loosely. That there was a conversation of a Japanese entrepreneur. They said, if you have to be efficient, because if you have 7,000, you should not spend 7,999. So thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Liliana. Thanks, Daniel. I think that someone else had their hand raised, but okay. Jorge, please go ahead. Hello, everyone from Ecuador, from Guayaquil. My question is for you. The question is, what parameters should be considered to implement a pilot project that optimizes time and cost in the house building? That's very interesting, because here in Guayaquil, we see that very few houses are implemented with the solar panels, for instance. Is there any governmental requirement, perhaps, for this type of infrastructures that are not that cheap? Yes, usually you do a pilot project because you want to test something, right? So you want to learn in that pilot project before implementing massively. It is like you are going to launch a new project of a car. First of all, you do this car, you test it before you launch it to the market and for everyone to buy it. It's the same thing with these housing projects, because you're interested in getting to know who are going, well, first of all, why do you want to do this? Okay, so if you have a high consumption of energy because it's too hot and has air conditioning, or perhaps it is energy poverty and there is no air conditioning, but they have a very poor conditions of comfort inside the house, or all the way around because it's very cold and they spend a lot in wood and they have no suitable conditions inside the house that will cause damages to health. So once you identify that problem that you propose and you say, okay, well, I believe that we can solve this problem by doing a massive project of solar panels in the houses. Then you try to find what are those houses, those that have, let's say, a film roof, perhaps that they are not going to withstand that. So you start wondering and asking questions if you want for all houses of Ecuador to have these photovoltaic panels, and then you find out that there are some barriers, and that pilot project tries to unblock those barriers, and then you keep learning. So what are the characteristics, features should have a pilot project that should be replicable? So you're going to test something that you can replicate many times. What we did is with FIPA terminal, we did 30 houses, but we chose a house that we quite typical that could be replicated in many other places. Maybe we could have brought a very expensive technology from Germany, but no one was going to be able to buy it and pay for it. So we use technology within the range of prices that the households could afford. So that's basically the type of questions. Okay, what do you want to test? How can you massify it? And if you want some support, for instance, maybe you say, okay, I would like to place solar panels in all houses, but it turns out that when you see there are no enough professionals that could supply that massive program. So if the government says, okay, we are going to place 850,000 solar panels in 1 year, but it turns out that you only have 2 technicians who can do these across the country, that's not going to be able to be implemented. So those are the questions when you make a pilot project. Thank you very much. I see more questions on the chat. I don't know if someone moderating, or should I read it, or is, yes, okay. Yeah, there is a comment by Alonso. We just have a few minutes left. So Alonso states that it would be interesting the greater implementation of models such as ESCO models, and perhaps not to see the in-depth the debt capacity, but instead the savings capacity. Yes, the ESCO models, which as the companies of energy services, what they do is the company installing those technologies are the ones taking the debt, for instance, and they do not sell the technology, but the service provided by the technology, for instance, the cooling service. And the end user is going to pay for the service of cooling at the same time, and they're paying the technology as well, but they pay this directly to ESCO. There are other types of barriers, such as standards models or legislation models where it does not allow for these projects to be implemented. For instance, ESCO is for just the public sector buildings, you know. Maybe they cannot implement the ESCO model because they do not allow them to get indebted more beyond the fiscal electoral year. So these ESCO models requires for the company to purchase the technology, for instance, air conditioning that are efficient or solar panels. They install them, but for the payment, you need to use them between 3 to 5 years. So the ROI goes beyond the fiscal or electoral year, and also the rules of government in Mexico does not allow for you to sign a contract beyond a year. So there are other type of barriers where the ESCO model in Latin America, in some countries of Latin America, has not been able to be successful or enter. Okay, Pamela, yes, she placed the link. Thank you, Liliana. Yes, we have another comment by Daniel, who states that this is a request, some documents or studies that can be downloaded or that you could send to us, Liliana, so to get the calculations, a methodology of energy efficiency. Yeah, I'm sure. My pleasure. I will leave this to you on the chat. Also, we can also upload these on the platform without a problem. Okay, great. We have 2 more comments by Juliana, who states that in addition to the project presented by Liliana, is interesting that they have contemplated the training is very common to have very innovative tools, but they're not successful because people have not incorporated these habits of rational consumption and energy efficiency. Thank you, Calvin, for that time reminder. It was rational consumption. Yes, thank you, Liliana. So, and the last two comments. Much of what Alejandro says, the needs and conditions establish the criteria for its implementation, but we must count on the government support and other entities to obtain the grants and support that are not at the reach of the user. And Alonso also adds, well, the most typical things are solar panels, but in Chile, there are examples in universities and hospitals where there is an ESCO that has been well implemented, such as boilers and changes of machinery, and they are paid in less than 2 years. That's great. With these two comments of Alejandro and Alonso, we completed this first part of the session number 7. Thank you, Liliana, for your presentation and participation and this approach to the project management piece. And I would like to give the floor now to Stephanie Sueldo from Youth for Energy, who's joining us today in the moderation of today's session to introduce our next special speaker. Thank you so much, Liliana and Valentina. And now, moving on, we are going to introduce Diego Pera. He started in VPUB for the projects of transportation and real estate. He joined McKinsey, which is a capital of acquisitions of portfolio, where he started his specialization in the energy by evaluating conventional projects as well as renewable ones. In 2019, he started in Sierra Mesa to cover the Latin American market, including the opening of markets in Colombia. In 2022, he joined the Trinidad Solar as a manager of MIA for Latin America, participating in the procurement in Chile. Currently, he's a energy director for Mexico for Alvarez and Barzal in other outstanding project. He has the wind project, the HST terminal, and OHL in Mexico, a portfolio of PDG in Chile, and the Park of La Guarana in Brazil. He has graduated from Thamson. He has an MBA from the University of Applied Technology in Berlin, applied studies in Berlin. And now, Diego, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Such a great pleasure to be able to deliver this talk. I think it was very interesting the comments and questions that you've been placing on the chat. Well, I would like to share with you from the point of view of a financer. What are financial institutions and multilateral bilateral banks as investment criteria? As criteria of investment, just to give you, well, in terms of criteria, these are not static, just like technology has been changing. When if it's from the 70s and 80s up to this data where we have very high levels of efficiency, same case with wind or biomass technology. All these technologies have undergone the changes, and they have gave rise for these organisms to have organizations to have very specific criteria that were located in a certain period of time, but then technology started to move forward, and there were most competition. They started to implement more aggressive models. If you combine this with the macroeconomic environment or the business cycle, it has a very significant impact. Just to exemplify this, I would like to talk about the first renewable project, which was a wind park in the Oaxaca area, where they have a very high wind resource. There are very turbulent winds, so you have to place some reinforcements to the turbines. At the time I'm trying to land this at project level, these were the first wind parks or wind plants in Mexico. We had a purchase agreement with the mining company, which was one of the largest of the world and the most important in Mexico. This was a 15-year contract. Between 15 and 20 years was actually the contract. But in this case, in Mexico, they just wanted to sign up to 15 years. And the credits back then, the idea was always to try to align the term of the credit with the term of a PPA is okay, depend according to the criteria of risk of each one of them. So what happened when doing this transaction, they cover certain criteria that I'm going to comment later on to cover the debt, and there is a criteria that is amortize to amortize in 15 years. This type of structures, well, the bank was seeking to have a lesser term than 15 years because they tried to refinance this type of credits and to sell it through bonds, or simply they were going to sell it to another bank. So according to the business models of each one of them. However, something very interesting that occurred years later, and these were not only decades, it was just years later. There was 2012 for 2015, 2016, where the energy reform was sanctioned in Mexico. Mexico turned into a country that was the hot spot in Latin America because we had greater volumes. It was projects of $230 and $300 million. There was some energy reform that gave rise to the opening of private investment with one of the models that benefited the investment very quickly. So there were a lot of competition among the banks because the projects, there were not many. So the most important banking here, we are talking about 5, 6 international banks. And then many other international banks that started to come in. So they start to think how to be more competitive from the financial standpoint. So what we had at the energy prices, that they were lower and lower because at the end of the year, the utilities and the off-taker that requested more economic prices. Okay, if these Acciona, I'm going to go to another utility company. So we saw the trend of the company. We were like $60, $70 per megawatt hour. And we ended in the auctions about prices close to $20. There was a world milestone. And this reflected the level of competition, and also something that is very important to consider, the low rates that were happening within these credits. And at the time, these favored for all credits and for banking to be more aggressive. And we were saying that at the beginning, they were considering the ratio covers of 1.5 of the debt, and they lowered to 1.4, and the most competitive that I saw was 1.2. So these affects the capacity of debt and to have more profitable projects. Now, we do not have to lose sight that these type of projects that we're talking about, the long-term projects, the solar parks have a lifespan between 30 to 40 years. The wind turbines can also be between 25 and 35 years. So after 15 years, I have repaid all the credits. I can seek refinancing. This becomes very attractive. But what happens when the market conditions keep changing? And we have an example where we had from changes of regulation where we passed the pandemics and we had a significant closing in the energy sector. So from the projects that we already had that were ready to be displayed and that were under development, at the end of the day, they had a very important impact because the supply chain, you did not only have projects, but how am I going to supply that technology, the logistics chain, the entire transportation system? There was a big crisis, and this made for all prices, especially in transportation, to skyrocket. And if I had contracts of auctions that I have already won, and that was going to connect my project for 2 or 3 years, when my costs triple and I have very low prices of energy, and then the interest rates start to increase, then the business is not pulling off. So we try to renegotiate it with the governments. We start to also negotiate it with suppliers, etc. So these are brought about for all projects. Well, some of them need to step out, but not under the conditions that we used to see. Now we're talking about the indicators of leveraging, and in this case of training to the staff. We're talking about large projects that are different from residential and commercial projects. However, something important to mention is the way that they were doing operation and maintenance. At the end, it was a training, so someone or a third party can do all of this. So they started to tie all the suppliers of technology and to maintenance operation on all projects, even if we were talking about availability. That is, if my project was available 99% of all of the time, well, simply because the project was not executed correctly, it has an availability of 60% or 55%. This has a significant impact because it means that in the case of my business, it's quite different for what I have presented to my investors, banks, and committees compared to the reality. And this has a very important impact as well, because in the end, this is a reputational issue. So the most simple thing is to say, okay, look, this is because of the technology or the technician is not going to be the fault of the utility company. So they started to reflect this project, and there was a perspective that perhaps before it was really good, but now it's not very good, because they start saying, okay, well, they told me that the project was going to generate this and this much, but no, that's not reality. I have to buy energy in the market, so et cetera, many problems. There are still mechanisms to fix this type of problems at the end of the day when it's about technology. They're very complex, but when we are talking about operation and maintenance services, well, here we can do some adjustments so that we can repower for this park. Perhaps it's not going to be 99%, but 90 or 93%, that is not so far from reality. And this makes for the banks themselves to have that opening to be able to finance this type of projects. There are other market issues. This particularly happens in the Chilean market, where they have high degrees of curtail, and this is because they have an accelerated period of time of solar panels. In the northern of Chile is extremely saturated of solar energy. We have very high levels of this, and right now the batteries are solving this problem. We know nowadays there is a transmission line that is going to be operated in the forthcoming years, but I have some projects that are stalled. They cannot sell energy. Of course, the banks start wondering, okay, what's happening in this situation? And how is this going to impact the business case of the batteries? Well, batteries in this case have a very different model of integration, but it is not the same. If I'm going to be thinking about a battery where I have a 90% dumping, or if there is where there is a high demand, or for some data centers that are tied to the net that are being built, and they're going to energize with the solar energy, and we need the batteries as well. So here the case is quite different. Why? Because the off-taker, these data centers, need an energy consumption that should be steady. You need energy quality. And this is something that solar power does not provide usually. So you need to integrate other type of technologies to be able to provide this service. And here we are talking that we are considering the capacity market, the energy prices, and that you are using clean energy. But it's very different from what is happening in Mexico nowadays. In Mexico, currently, 3 months ago, I had the opportunity in the area of Bajillo, which is above the center of Mexico. And we saw a data center. You're not going to believe this, but it had 20 motor engines of diesel. We're saying, oh no, but we're in an area where there is energy, not enough, but you have energy. why are you connected to diesel? And because we're not supposed to pollute or contaminate. Well, the companies were desperate to get energy anywhere at any cost. So when you say, you look, you cannot install in this case until we have to avoid the diesel consumption at all costs. There's a specific microgrid. We're talking about 15 megawatts. These are very large projects, of course, and not to be connected to the grid and the network, and just to consider solar power, but also to have a battery component. And we are not going to discard this, because at the end you need a backup, but not again the primary consumption, diesel. So this has an implied cost that is quite high, economically speaking, and also an environmental cost. You cannot imagine to see 20 diesel-based engines, and these solutions should be popularized. It is not only solar power and wind power alone. We must seek and taking and seizing all this boom of the AI and more sophisticated technology, where we can estimate the consumption of energy, and at the same time to have these projects ready. And perhaps the utility company is going to say, look, this is an isolated supply business. Perhaps there are some people or some companies that are interested in financing this type of project, and this becomes very relevant when we have institutions. For instance, the development bank has a very specific function to implement a project that commercial banks are not going to do so. So the perfect market is the Brazilian market. The development bank in Brazil, they have a very aggressive financing for projects. They have 30, 25-year projects, and the bank in Brazil, they do so. So we are saying that they are seeking here 7, 10 years of commercial banking, and in Chile has a similar model. And these players are very important. They must be integrated in the project, especially when these are very aggressive projects having technologies that is not emerging perhaps, but very in particular criteria. An interesting case is also the German Development Bank. Last February, I had a very interesting conversation with them. And within the investment criteria, we're not only talking about capacity issues and what is the level, a percentage of our leveraging in a store, 60, 70% of the project. This is going to determine the return and the ratio of coverage or the cost of debt. So they are even providing credits that are below the standard, because they are looking at other metrics. What metrics? The way they do a more thorough analysis of environmental and social impacts. You need metrics that should be more sophisticated, not only the technical aspect, but that they stop and check in what way these projects are impacting the communities. For instance, in Mexico, we have in the Southeast Mexico, we have indigenous communities, many of them, and it is also, there's a lot of forest. So we need projects of large projects of solar scale, let's say 100 or 150 megawatts. It sounds very good because the Yucatan Peninsula is an area with very low energy, but with a lot of demand. And in fact, the projects that are in the area, if I'm not mistaken, it is 92, 93% of the installed capacity is the thermal. It has combined or blended cycles, and they use diesel as well. To integrate solar projects is quite complicated, because you must decide, okay, you have to say, look, I have to clean the entire area, to deliver these large-scale projects. And of course, perhaps it is very much likely that is not going to happen because of the environmental issue, and it has a reputational risk also. because you are clearing forests to place solar energy, even if it's a clean energy. With all these criteria, they are considering not only what is going to be the impact per se of energy, but how much are you going to save in emissions? How much are you injecting in clean energies? But also the environmental impact and the fauna, flora communities within the area. Maybe you can also check what type of solutions are more convenient for them. In Mexico, we have a very interesting situation because these large scale projects do not fit in the network. We had a very significant investment with the grid. We just executed 0.6% of the budget. That's quite low. And there are no projects that can fit there. And now we're looking into solutions under a scheme that is known as the self-consumption. Self-consumption are going to be 20 mega projects. These can be or not connected to the grid and the network. And this is also forcing the utility companies and the investment funds to try to migrate to other schemes where mega projects perhaps are not going to be the most interesting. If you wanted to develop a short-term project in 1 or 2 years, perhaps it's going to be of this type. We are not talking about volume anymore. We are talking about projects around the off-takers. I love this because we are not just in the market rules or the economic criteria to fit it. We're not forcing anything. I've always thought firmly that the entire transition should not be around technologies. It should not be around the generators that it has been usually. And all the benefits were there. I believe that the actual energy transition is going to be around the off-takers and the consumers. And so this is pushing to migrate to this new business model that is going to allow you to have solutions, tailor-made solutions for a hotel group, for instance, just to give you an example, or companies or cooling companies that consume a lot of energy, solutions that are more tailor-made. And that with all these new technologies, and clearly we are going to migrate and to change the market rules, because clearly there's not going to be a match on what we have in the market rules and what's happening in the projects. So these type of solutions are also forcing the banks. And okay, you want to engage in projects, energy projects, well, then you will have to start looking into these type of models where the energy projects, if they have a higher risk model, but these are more customized projects. So this is going to force the off-takers to have their own projects and to have higher levels of guarantees, credit letters, or escrow backouts, etc. So we are in a very interesting moment where we are going to, well, these new models will start changing. And in Chile, we have projects where no one wants to finance, and they have their batteries because very high the risk. In Brazil, the banking development banks are #1 in Latin America, and also the commercial banks are trying to be more aggressive. However, they're not going to reach it. So development banks are providing a space so that a commercial bank can take it, however, without backup. In Mexico, we have Fonadin, which is a fund for the development of infrastructures. And although they lend the money to projects, perhaps what they're saying is, okay, I'm not going to lend you the money, but I'm going to give you a kind of equity, and I'm going to protect the equity. The loss is going to be taken by me directly, and then it's going to be the bank, and then the shareholders, etc. So these type of structures are much more innovative, and this allows more flexibility to incorporate new credits and to accelerate transition, which is what we are looking for. So I don't know if I have 8 more minutes for 2 questions, because sorry, there are many questions already on the chat. Sorry, I didn't answer. Yes, there are 2 questions on the chat. Well, actually, several questions. Okay, start with the first one. Sure, please go ahead. Jorge Molina states, on what economic criteria can Ecuador develop a renewable energy project that would be feasible and benefit the community? Well, the economic criteria at the end of the day, the most important thing, okay, I'm going to try to take first the project level and then to a micro level. At a project level, considering the income less expenses, to have an interesting project, you must talk about live margin. 80 is low, but the average should be between 83-85%. This is going to give you an idea of what should be your rate given the level of costs. The capex level, for instance, with certain technology, I'm going to talk about an average. The energy projects usually have to be paid within a 7-year period in the Latin American economies, which poses some risk. In more advanced countries, they can pay for 10 years. But since we have regulatory reforms all the time at very high rates, it has an impact. So it's always seeking 7-8 years and perhaps a top or maximum of 9 years. And we're talking about in terms of profitability of a capex, at a ROI rate. This is going to vary from country to country because it has an exchange rate issue. But in the case of Ecuador, since it is a dollarized country, perhaps it should be something similar to the United States, where we can say 7-8% plus a 1 from risk that is going to have some inflation rate. Maybe you can have an interesting project with 12-13% US dollars in Ecuador. Thank you. Okay, next question. From the private company or entrepreneurship, can you access financing? Startups, can you access financing? Yes, you can access. Now, probably we're more focused in the seed capital, that have more innovative models. For instance, you were talking about the ESCO companies, and to be also private projects. The problem with the energy project is that for startups, and I have to say this because I'm also an entrepreneur, and I have a batteries project that I can come in. It's very difficult because these are very intensive in terms of capital. Usually the seed capital, and this is the most landed experience for Mexico, is not as accessible because they say, okay, we have these two large business models, and we have a capital intensive and a cost intensive. In the energy is always 100% capital intensive, and you have low margins, low cost. But that's why you have 85 and 90% sales. That is a big challenge for entrepreneurs and small projects. So it is very important to seek the multilateral organizations such as the IDB, or others with the agency. In Chile, we worked on a batteries project to implement in Tehuantepec, and these are the type of organizations for small entrepreneurs can exist. That for larger companies, it's much more simple because they simply are not going to do this at project level with the utilities. They're going to do this at corporate level. They are perhaps going to access or some price because they have a credit line, and there's going to be significant savings. They are going to lower their rates. They can lower their energy costs in 98% or 100% in some cases. And that is the way that they can do this. It's very common to do this. For instance, in hotels here in Mexico, there's a lot done by hospitals as well, but also for the small traders, perhaps those that have these small stores, very small stores. It's much more complex because there should be models where these companies, perhaps they have these bases and a financing backup, like an investment fund, that they can be supported. That's where it's very important to have a well-structured company. Thank you, Diego. Next question. Javier Velázquez, according to what you're mentioning, the transition must be around the consumers, not the generators. How can you see that we can plan and develop an energy transition in the Colombian, from the Colombian to Amazon region? Of course, here in Colombia, they connected to other countries where we share this same ecosystem. What development potential of energy transition can be done from the Amazonian peoples? This is a very interesting case, and I had the opportunity to assess a project in the Amazon region, but in Peru. And it was to energize a community where, well, they had diesel-based engines. It was very difficult to bring the diesel because it was done through boats. And this was, it was diesel-based. However, we designed a project with the utility. We told them, okay, we are going to do an assessment of this project for solar power with batteries. And we are going to find out whether the 100% of consumption can be guaranteed for 5 years and to be 100% clean with solar power and batteries. So there was a structure of PPA. We're telling them that the cost of per megawatt hour was $180. It's a lot of money for small communities, so much money that they are paying for it. When we know that a level cost of solar power can be around $45 or less. So we carried out this exercise and we found so many barriers. Technology is right there. The batteries and the solar technology was there, and also the grids. However, the greatest challenge that we bumped into, and for the communities specifically, not from the investment standpoint, is that the energy contracts were not adequate. They were not appropriate. You can imagine that let's imagine that they were paying you a flat rate of $170 and $180 that I mentioned during the solar curve. So at this cost, okay, look, we are going to reduce these 130 or 140 or whatever. It was to overpay solar power for these communities. If I would be asked of how this should be done, well, this should be around of saying, okay, we need different types of rates, not only to have a flat rate, which is much more simple, but to have a differentiated rate so that they can have the access to a reasonable energy cost. Because that way the spends for that solar power is going to be very high, and the performance, well, the performance and the profit is going to be end up only in the investors, but the idea is also for the benefit for the communities. Yes, thank you so much, Diego. Next question is by Pamela Piquil. The proposal will be then, or is to build the energy models with the community management and engagement. Could you please, could you repeat the question, because I heard half of it. So the proposal would be to build the energy models with the community management and engagement? Yes, I am in favor of this type of projects. In fact, the ideal example is the United States. The United States is carrying out this type of projects. And in fact, there's a lot of responsibility that has been awakened. And there's been an awakening of community solars in Texas, California. And at the end of the day, they must do some adjustments within the program, because every single person or house has their own measurements, and they're going to have some impacts. But the idea of having this shared, this leads to relations. Like in an apartment, okay, who's going to be responsible for the cost guarantees, or perhaps there are some outstanding payments. So as a solution, I believe that's quite good. However, this brings about other issues. Let's call them neighboring, if you may. And they are important because these can also bring about some problems. And in addition, if these are being financed, even worse, because this becomes much more difficult. However, by structuring them in a more appropriate way, perhaps by isolating responsibilities and obligations of each party from the utility company, the community, the bank, the government, etc., and limiting or restricting these very clearly, these projects can actually work out. Especially for the projects in the Amazon region, which is a very complex area to energize and work on. These type of projects, without a doubt, are worthwhile, but it's very important to consider the commercial structures. That is not going that solar energy is not going to be overpaid, and this has a significant impact within the community. So at the end of the day, is to try to give them the best solution to provide them the best solution with clean energy at best cost and with quality, of course. Okay, thank you. And we have another question from Jalisco, Demetrio Delgado. What would be the organizations where we can approach, where these entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, can approach looking for funding? Well, we have FIDE, which is the trust fund for energy or electricity savings. They can finance this type of projects. And also, there are private organizations. For instance, you have a bank has or niche programs within the banks that you can approach. They can even provide 100% of financing of the cost of the system. This, in fact, matches very good. And what is going to be your estimating savings? They projected, they forecasted, and they provide 7 years of project or 10 years. That's at the top. But it depends on the area. If you are a trader or you have a store, you have to check the rate. For the case of Mexico, we are saying that these are rates, for instance, that are connected to lower medium assistance. Also, we have to check, and this is very important, to check the cost of connecting to the grid, because if connecting to the grid can skyrocket that cost, maybe to have other types of investment for solar panels, perhaps it is much more convenient to have a bank of capacitors to decrease the demand, and the bank of capacitors are instruments that are 100% financeable for this type of, or fundable for this type of projects, and with energy savings. But it's important to understand how's your income structure, and also how much are the rates, and how much energy am I consuming. In the case of the stores, there are intermediate, low basis, these companies themselves have within their systems. Perhaps in one day they can have an energy solution in just one day, or another proposal. They say, look, you can use this. FinDay is of the government one of the most competitive. However, the ones that have the best the scope of reach are the private banking. I forgot the name of this bank that helped us a lot in several projects. I'm sorry about that. Okay, good, Diego. Thank you so much. Because of time constraints, we're going to stop with the questions. And thank you so much for answering those on the chat as well. We are going to thank all these students for attending today's session. And we are going to thank deeply to the active participation to Liliana and Diego for sharing their experience, knowledge, and vision around the management and financing of energy projects. Thank you for your contributions. They have been fundamental to inspire new ideas and strengthen capacities of the youth, because here we are an intergenerational group with different ages and in 2 parts of Latin America. And also, we are trying to transform these dreams in very concrete proposals that will boost this energy just transition from local to global. and the energy future that is built with ideas, but especially with action and cooperation and commitment, which is quite relevant. And now I would like it to state with this quote that is not going to be, the changes are not going to happen only from a company, but from consumers. And that's where we want to project all those who develop these projects towards energy transition. And thank you so much for your attendance. And next Thursday, we are having a session number 8. Please open your cameras, turn on your cameras for the final picture, group picture. Thank you. Thank you so much, Diego and Liliana, for joining us. Please open your cameras for the group picture. And thank you for your presentations. Okay. Just 1 sec until I take the group picture. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next Thursday. Have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.